Community News. We got a great show for you today here with attorney, CPA, and now candidate for Coral Gables Commission, Javier Banos, Group 3. Javier,
correct.
Thanks so much for joining us here at Miami Community News. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much, Andy, for having me in this morning here with you, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring some attention to not only the campaign, but Coral Gables in general on the issues there.
Okay. Well, it's good to have you. You know, before we get started, I don't know, Javier, I know you don't do a weekly show here at Miami Community News. Mm-hmm. And have you ever seen Tommy Stitt dressed so nicely like he is today?
I am. By the way, anybody who doesn't know, Tommy is our radio guy, the technician, the one that does everything.
He does
everything. Today, I mean, he looks great. He's quite handsome. I think there's some lucky girl.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of two things. Right. Either he's got a job interview somewhere today. Are you taking a long lunch today?
Or I'm going to court.
I didn't think that might be the third. I thought either you've got a job interview somewhere and you're planning a 2-hour lunch, nod, wink, wink.
Right.
Or maybe you got a hot date later tonight.
That's probably the likely of the two.
Likely of the two.
Yeah, Zoom now is via court now is via Zoom. So, the judge only sees you this high up.
right. So you don't need any.
You don't need the nice khakis.
So you could actually, in doing a court proceeding now, Javier is a lawyer, right?
A
CPA.
That's true.
Right. You can just be like those newscasters that are wearing, shorts underneath.
Well, remember, I am an officer of the court. I would never ever do something, as egregious as that. But what's being interesting, that like everything else, judges and attorneys are getting accustomed to this process. So I've had hearings in which judges get their wives and say, "Honey, can I get you a cup of coffee?" And and judges in the middle of a formalized evidentiary hearing. So with a rope, they have all these filters in the back that look rather awkward,
Right.
But it is. It's been. I think it's made the court more efficient. So everyone is pretty. I mean, at least every attorney I've spoken to is very happy with the Zoom interaction. Trials are going to be a little tricky.
Well, we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about your professional career, your soon to be what looks like public service life.
Right, yeah.
I know you've had a lot of public service.
Hopefully.
Over the past 14, 15 years.
Correct.
But before we do, let's talk about a little bit of news, if we can. U.S. House of Representatives right now, as we're having this show, have just begun impeachment proceedings on President Donald Trump. This will be the second time that impeachment proceedings will be brought up against him. The first time in U.S. history that has occurred. Surely the House will send impeachment articles to the Senate for trial, where Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, it was reported yesterday, is leaning toward a conviction of President Trump. According to the New York Times, McConnell believes Trump has committed multiple impeachable offenses and, quote, is pleased at the idea of him being impeached. And it is reported he, quote, plans to never speak to Donald Trump again. 5 House Republicans have already publicly stated they plan to vote for impeachment, and as many as 5 others are believed to be leaning in that direction. Liz Cheney, the third most powerful congressman in the U.S. House of Representatives, has publicly stated she will vote for impeachment. You might know Liz Cheney, the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney. For the first time since 1953, a female inmate has been executed in the United States. Lisa Montgomery, 52, was executed by lethal injection in a federal prison in Indiana yesterday. She's the 11th prisoner executed at that facility since July, when President Trump resumed federal executions. And finally, it's been reported that 3 congressmen just this morning helped organize the siege on the U.S. Capitol and were in conversations with the organizers prior to the siege of the U.S. Capitol. Representative Paul Gosar, Representative Andy Biggs, and Representative Mo Brooks are all being investigated for their role in the sedition. So that's your news for the day. Javier Banos.
Eventful day, I guess.
Man, it just, Javier, before we get started on you, it's really a weird time.
It is.
And I wonder, on a local level, you're running for office. I know how that works in a city like Coral Gables or others. A lot of door knocking, a lot of, as I like to put it, wearing out of the soles of your shoes, not the sole inside you, but the sole
Correct.
of your shoes.
Oh, believe me, I'm going for the 3 pairs.
I bet you are. Great way to. I know that Eugene Flynn at one time claims he lost a lot of weight. I know my good friend Joe Sanchez, when he ran for mayor of the city of Miami, lost a tremendous amount of weight just walking.
I need to lose the COVID-20.
You and me.
So believe me, I've been walking since September, prior to actually the election, and it's helped a great deal. If I only can get rid of pasta and actually control my mouth, perhaps I could lose more. But
it's always the starches, man.
It's
the
always
pasta,
the starches,
the rice, the bread,
and so many good places around town, that especially downtown Coral Gables, that have great places to eat. So,
and we're going to talk about that in a little while, because I've noticed there seems to be less and less of those places than there were in the past, and maybe part of the reason for your run for office. But I wonder, when we're seeing what's happening in the in politics in general. We saw the election in November and how that was really divided. Now we're seeing more division as the president is resistant to get out of the White House. I'm not here to talk national politics today, but I wonder how that transcends down to a local level when running for office, when you're knocking on doors. Are people asking you things like your party affiliation?
Look, it is a common question, especially, Coral Gables has a very sophisticated, electorate. And my impression is people understand that this is a nonpartisan election. And when you focus on those things, you get a cadre of questions and other things that are going in the city, such as the growth, development, public safety, that are a real concern to them. But yeah, the question always comes up, are you a Republican or a Democrat? And especially, in the eve of the prior election on November 3rd, and especially over the past week, there has been sort of a litmus test as to why is it that where you are. It's unfortunate because I'm running for what I think is in the best interest of the residents, and sometimes you say what you used to be, what your party is, and the conversation stops because there's so much baggage is put behind that particular label, but ultimately, my impression has been that there's some people who just that's a conversation stopper for them, okay, or they starter depending on what you tell them, but the vast majority of the folks that I've spoken to really care about. Well, they love their country, and but they really care about the local issues in the local community. It hasn't been a big thing for me. I think I've tried to focus on things that have nothing to do with nationalized politics, only because I want to fix your potholes. I'm not going to do any immigration policy, right? So, but for example, where it has become an issue, and what I've seen it become a real concern, is on the issue of public safety. So, there was a lot of talk at the beginning because of some inequities that exist in our country. There was a lot of talk about defund the police and things like that, and all these, and those are very much local decisions. And what I clearly am not for those things. I think we need public safety. I think we need to reform. Part of what I did when I served on a civil service board for over 5 years, and most of what I did was look at violations of public employees in civil service rules. A lot of them were police officers. So I can tell you for a fact that there are bad apples out there.
Of course.
And
there are in every profession.
In every profession. And they do a lot of egregious things. But there's a difference between not showing up at a motor call, stealing hours, losing evidence, to the situation where someone is being killing somebody, like what happened unfortunately to Mr. Floyd. So the conversation at the local level, and that has been really one of the concerns. The conversation at the local level when you enter those issues is there's got to be a negotiation between the unionized workforce, the city commission, and the residents, so that if there's reform to be needed, and Commissioner Mena actually went out there and said, do we need to do something? And the chief has been very proactive about making sure that we have we have a very professional workforce in the police department, and a higher level of education, a better officer all around.
But in Coral Gables, the police chief is still Hudak, right?
Yes.
Incredible reputation he has.
He does, yes.
Okay, and always the perception of policing in Coral Gables has always been very positive, I believe. I think that, as I understand it, correct me if I'm mistaken, you have to have a college degree to be a police officer in the city of Coral
My understanding,
Gables.
if I'm not wrong, you got to have at least 2 years of
College
in order to be
education.
there. But you got to have experience. That's what I'm trying to say about a higher level or better level of police.
Well, I think that's why you have that in Coral Gables.
you really stop the problem at the front door. Okay, you're not waiting, because it's very difficult to eliminate a bad employee. Okay, there's a whole host of rules. The unionized contracts, their procedures, embedded procedures, which some of them I don't agree with, in which makes it almost impossible or very bureaucratic to be able to get rid of a bad apple in the city of Coral Gables.
But that's everywhere in policing.
Not necessarily. There's some reforms, and there's some, funny enough, old reforms, things have been embedded in some of the charters for a long time. Like, for example, what the city of Miami has with the civil service rules that make it somewhat more feasible to get rid of a bad apple. I think some of these unionized contracts that we have signed in the Gables really tied our hands when you have a situation. But what the police have done, the police chief has done proactively, is get a better officer to begin with. And then, we have different degree of problems. Crime is a concern in the city of Coral Gables, but it's not the type of crime that you may have in the city of Miami. It's not the type of level of crime that you may have, in other areas of Miami-Dade County. It's a type of crime where you get a lot of petty theft. Okay, you get a lot of vandalism. Okay, you have a significant issues dealing with traffic. And we have had murders, and we have had horrible situations, like, for example, what happened a few months ago with that shootout in which almost one of the city clerk almost was shot because of bullet. So, but that's a rarity. The vast majority of the crime really has to do with theft, and I had
cars breaking into cars,
packages taken from the house, breaking and entry when the house is empty. We have a lot of residents who don't live in the Gables, who are foreigners, and so the houses are empty. And what happens is the police is very, very, very professional. So I had a package taken out of my house. I had a Ring video. They did an interview. I got 2 calls from several police officers. There was a patrol car going around my house. I got a letter subsequent to that and 2 follow-up calls. So you're talking about a level of professionalism.
And they knew you were running for office?
No. Well, look, this is... I'm not doing this. I understand. But one of the things I've been trying to be very careful is not to say that at the very first thing, or not to even try to mention it, because I'm afraid of getting a specialized treatment. Nor it's not something that I'm seeking.
Well, it's almost in a perverse sort of way. It's almost a good thing that package got stolen from the front of your house, because you got to see firsthand how the police work in Coral Gables.
And then in the same way, one of the reasons I'm running it's directed towards one employee who did fairly bad process of picking up my recycling. So nothing like being treated improperly to actually drive you to try to fix the system, right? But besides that one experience that I had with that employee, and the city has tried to really address the issues. And there are many problems that can be fixed. So I'm not trying to say there's a panacea and everything works perfectly, but I got a call from the assistant city manager and the head and the supervisor of that employee when they had that issue with the recycling, because he kicked all the recycling all over the place. He wouldn't take the thing. He cursed me out.
He went postal.
He went a little postal. I didn't realize that my Ring camera was on. So, and I wasn't there.
It's funny. It's funny because today in America, people seem to forget that we all have cameras, and there's cameras everywhere.
It is ubiquitous. I can tell you, I'm knocked on over 2,000 doors since October. And it's been a situation where every single home I go to, there's a camera looking at the fact that I'm coming in, that I'm knocking on their door, that I'm bringing it is now pervasive. It's everywhere.
It's not. You mentioned unions, and I want to pivot and go in a little different direction now. Do you know what the strain on the pension strain is on the budget in Coral Gables? Is it very large? I would assume, being an older city,
Right.
having a lot of retired police officers. Do you have your own fire department in Coral Gables?
We do. So I've served, most of my public service has been on public pensions. Okay. And I served on the retirement board in the city of Coral Gables as one of its trustees and one of its members. The plan is $200 million in the hole, improving every year because of some steps that have been taken and because the market has done very well. But it is a major issue for the future Coral Gables and our ability to actually obtain employees. It costs about $26 million to $30 million a year.
What percentage is that of the budget?
The budget is about $150 million. So yeah, it's a significant
13% of the budget.
Yeah, so it's a significant
My
chunk.
fifth grade math serves me correctly.
So what happens is, given that's the situation that has come into place, the steps that need to be taken, and this is one of my campaign issues, is that we need to stop the bleeding. So employees that come into the city, we can make exceptions for fire and police because they're sort of a specialized workforce. But employees that come into the city, especially the administrative staff, they should get a 401k, 403b, some type of fixed benefit that doesn't put the city in the long term with this legacy costs that are essentially killing our budget. If we did not have the $200 million liability, the yearly liability would be something like $5 to $6 million.
Right.
So it's costing between 20 to 25 million to get over the hurdle of that $200 million.
Yeah, and I mean there's a breaking point for that, right? Because at some point it's either, well, we got to tax people more,
and the problem,
or cut services.
And the problem with that is it's not a situation where we are not letting that balloon grow, right? The only reason for which that balloon has not grown is because we have a situation where the market has done fairly well. Okay, but to give you an example, in March, the worst moment the market had because of COVID, the plan lost $60 million in 60 days.
Holy cow.
Okay. Now we've made that up. I don't want to, but that gives you a sense of how fragile the plan is. And so,
Yes.
any particular disaster, any particular big change could put us in a significant hole. And I think a more structural change in which we start little by little putting the seeds now to essentially solve that problem long term. That's a real solution to those problems.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the Miracle Mile, because I know it's been very controversial.
It has been.
And I'm curious of your opinion of what has been done in the past and maybe what needs to be done in the future.
Right.
My brother, one of my older brothers, Tom, lives in Coral Gables. And when they were constructing doing the renovation, or let's call it remodeling of Miracle Mile, making it more,
$25 million.
a lot of money I know it was over $20 million. Right. And so when that was occurring, the first thought that came to my head is, how are these businesses going to survive this remodeling of the mile? And
a lot of them fail.
And a lot of them, we see major spaces, the old Navarro is empty. Right. Right across the street, the Ale House, empty. Right. Of course, we've heard about John Martin's. That was a legendary restaurant there. But pre-COVID, he was ready to go down. Right. It wasn't that these things all were.
Martinique also left.
Martinique. Ortonique.
I'm sorry. Ortonique. My wife corrects me because I always say that wrong.
Martinique. We know where your mind's at on vacation in Martinique. But go ahead.
But yeah, look, the mile it's a challenge. Okay, the city went out there and spent a lot of significant money to try to improve the mile. And the idea behind it was to sort of bring it back. Between that hit, which wasn't that long ago, it was about 2 years ago, and COVID, we have lost a significant amount of business going into the mile. Now,
yes.
At the same time, pushed by some of sort of the more pro-development members of the commission, such as Commissioner Keon and the mayor, Valdez Fowley, there was a modification of, or there was a rewrite of the zoning code. And that rewrite of the zoning code, which is now going up for a vote in February, will have an ample hearing this Thursday at 5 p.m. Okay. And in which all residents are welcome to come in and have a conversation about what has happened. The fear is, the concern is, and it's my personal concern as well, that what that is essentially is a huge developer giveaway. What's going to happen on the mile? That we're going to have, because what they're doing is that the focus seems to be off-site parking. Okay. There are requirements today that say you got to have a parking pedestal and to have a very tall building.
Yes.
Well, they're taking that away, and they're saying, and the reason that's important is because it does exist, but it's so impractical as to just make it not a real choice for the developers. So, in order to facilitate higher growth, higher building on the mile proper, they're allowing
on the mile.
On the mile, they're allowing for this off-site parking. And the fear is, by allowing this off-site parking, now you're going to have massive growth. And the when they did the show or the illustration of what could possibly be there in early December, we're talking about some very high buildings, 6-8 stories on the mile proper. Yes, with a frontage. Yes, bringing density to the businesses. Yes, if you speak to some of the people on the bid on the business improvement district, they want density. They want folks coming into their stores. They want to have a walkable space, which we understand. The concern is, does it have to be on the mile itself? Can it be in the periphery? What is it going to be for everybody who? What is it going to be like for everybody who lives around Coral Gables? My house is on Casilla and Madera.
Oh, you're right near there.
I am 3 blocks away from the mile. I get on Madera a bunch of traffic every day. My friend Commissioner Forge, it's a street away from me, and he also gets a significant amount of traffic. So the question is, how is that going to impact the
residents?
The residents, their quality of life? Are you just bringing? In other words, is saving the mile at what cost?
Yeah, but see, it seems like a faulty argument to me. It's always, whenever business is down, we're in the middle of a COVID pandemic, right, and that's obviously part of the reason business has been down. And so, as you said, some of those places have gone out of business. You combine that with the fact that there was construction for 2-3 years going
Correct.
On. So these businesses couldn't survive one and then the other, right, piled on top. But it's always, when you get into these situations that developers come around and go, well, it's just about putting more bodies there. Mm-hmm. It appears to me, I always marveled and respected the way that they handled growth in Coral Gables. And essentially, the way it was put forth was that we're going to preserve the history of Miracle Mile.
Correct.
And we're going to allow you off of Miracle Mile, a block or 2 or 3 off of it, to build higher buildings. And you
Correct.
See them there, right? And
there's nothing wrong with that.
I think it's great,
especially if it's commercial. If it's commercial in nature, we have some significant companies and large, multinational companies that have offices on the Gables themselves and on the downtown.
Right.
And the concern that there seems to be is, it's the mile going to be the growth in the mile itself? Is it going to transform downtown Coral Gables into essentially a corridor of this big canyon of buildings?
Bad idea.
And I'm not for that. I think there's a lot more input that needs to be brought in by the residents. There's a lot more input that needs to be brought in by the folks who came up with the zoning changes. So there's a real understanding of what is going to happen there. And there's also some growth going on on adjacent, which also will be discussed during that meeting, on what is called the Craftsman section, which is just off the Miracle Mile. And they're also talking about bringing more density and more residential buildings. We can have a discussion about how high there is, but that makes more sense to me, okay? In the sense of,
I agree.
Okay, fine. But could it be townhouses? Could you do something that can the city bring in repairs to beautify the area, to bring trees, to make it a more residential neighborhood, because across the street there's a lot of multi-unit housing. So that seems to be a more logical way of organizing. Maybe not to the degree that there is, but there's got to be some tapering between how high we're going from the tall buildings in the downtown near the neighborhoods. If we just have these huge buildings, then you get what we have on US 1, with these buildings that look like they're going to fall right on top of you.
And I want to ask you about that. But before I do, I see a comment, which is a great one from my friend Chris Wolf here on Facebook. Construction for 2 or 3 years, and the parking was better than it is now. So I've heard that from a lot of people, that the parking after the renovation, the remodeling, if you will, of Miracle Mile actually is worse today than it was prior to that point.
Well, I tend to agree with that. I like the way the parking the way it was, and you can actually drive the car in rather than having to essentially parallel park every single time you do it.
Yes.
Now, is it more beautiful? Absolutely. And the materials higher end? Absolutely. Could they have picked something different? I have advocated for that, but whatever, it's done.
Okay. You can't go back.
Right.
Yes.
But there's plenty of parking on the periphery of the mile.
Well, let me interrupt you, because George Gonzalez then chimes in and says, also the old parking lots off the mile need to be knocked down and doubled or tripled in size.
And that has been an ongoing debate in the commission
for
quite some time. I mean, especially if you know where the Booyah Gastro Bar
yes.
is. If you know that.
Yeah, I know that parking lot well.
It is in absolute disrepair.
It's disgusting.
It does need to be demolished and rebuilt, and there's actually the city has requirements, and there's certain agreements to build that particular parking structure into something much larger.
Yeah, there's another one a block west of there.
And they're relics of the past. It was what was required back then. There are structures that don't necessarily have any aesthetic or Coral Gables inspiration that are consistent with the look of the city. So yeah, a significant modification of those needs to be the place. The debate is, okay, are we going to add this thing and then something on top of it? Okay, is it going to be a situation where this is going to be shared parking between residential buildings so it's an ongoing debate. The real density will be coming into the downtown because of a growth that's happening north of Miracle Mile. A lot of the buildings that you see on Ponds as you move up the mile
yes.
near A Street, all those buildings have already been designed for higher density. You can have, whether or not you agree with it, that is what's in the works. That is what has been authorized. So the question is a timing issue, okay, for this density to actually come to Coral Gables and to come to them, because that's already done. And what eventually goes in front of the commission, it gets approved. So I believe in my heart of hearts that the mile will eventually be fine. So what do we need to do this particular change today to answer what may be perceived as a current crisis, when in reality it's a timing issue to allow for some of this growth to actually take place.
I'm curious of your opinion as it relates to the development. So I went to LaSalle High School.
Okay.
And
beautiful place.
Beautiful place. And one of my classmates, Ellen Mudd,
La Mezquita, right?
Right there. You're right next to Mercy Hospital. One of my classmates, Ellen Mudd, and her brother, Phil Mudd, who you see on CNN all the time. He worked at a second in command at the CIA at one time. I used to go to their house all the time, often in high school. And they lived right off of US 1 in Coral Gables.
Right.
Where today almost borders the back street of their old house,
right,
is a large building of 12, 14, I don't know how many stories right there. I know it was a very controversial development in that many people thought spot zoning was implemented on that one property.
And it was.
It was.
And look, we're having the same debate going on now on the property that is the Agave project, which has already been approved, which is right on where Pond Circle is in the downtown. and there's another proposed building that's going in across from the courthouse that is proposing, not yet done, but proposing.
So where Christie's is, that area?
On the other side, on the west side,
Okay.
you know where there's a little street that curves
Yes,
into University.
very well. Yes.
They're planning on closing that particular street and
Okay.
put a 120 unit building there. Okay, which would be immense. The idea of tapering, it's important. If you're close to a residential neighborhood, the building should be smaller. It shouldn't be a taller
I
building.
couldn't agree with you more.
So what happens is, I sat with a bunch of neighbors in that particular area, okay? And the problem that you had when you sat with them is it was almost 7 o'clock at night and 7:30, and I couldn't hear them because the construction that was going on
It's horrible.
was deafening. Okay.
Right.
And if you're going to live in Coral Gables, you're going to have a quality of life, you're going to enjoy and pay the prices that we pay. We should definitely be able to be 8 o'clock and we should be asleep and should be, we should be, organizing our lives to end our day in a peaceful fashion. It shouldn't be a situation where we're getting construction and we're getting all this traffic and all these things happening right next to our homes. It is detrimental to our home values and it's detrimental to our quality of life.
Well, so here in South Miami, where the Winn-Dixie property is on 73rd Street, because you used to live here in South Miami.
Correct. Yes.
They approved, in essence, what's a 14-story building in that location. I thought it was inappropriate for the fact that you have residents living right there. To me, that shouldn't have been more than a 6 to 8 story building in that location.
I don't know enough about the project. I haven't lived here in years. It's been about 12 years that I haven't lived here. But I can tell you, because I've used to go to that area. It is also an area where you're almost in the downtown. There's a lot of townhomes around,
around it.
But it is an area in which there's a little more density. Should it be 14 stories? Probably not. Okay, but certainly it's a situation where a higher growth, higher density building made sense, which the Winn-Dixie was not, and that was a long time discussion in front of the South Miami Commission.
Yes, it was.
As to what was going to happen with that building, what they could do and they couldn't do, and what South Miami could do and what the county could do. But to some degree, a higher density building makes sense there. It doesn't make sense to do it when what you have right next to you is a little house.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you see it in the city of Miami along Coral Way. That was a problem that occurred. And finally, under Manny Diaz, they changed that through Miami 21. Although Miami 21, we had Joe Areola here yesterday, got a little watered down, as we discussed. But it prevented that from occurring, which if you go down Coral Way in the area as the roads, you'll see a 12-story building literally looking down on a single family home.
On a single family home. And that is something that, eventually what will happen and what the impression these developers have is that those single family homes will eventually become larger buildings, right? And population grows exponentially. So we need to make way for modification. So now cities clearly have a way of growing that is just natural and healthy, and it should happen as a cyclical format. However, you cannot do it so fast as to essentially kill off or be to a detriment to those people, because you're devaluing your property. That's what you end up doing, okay, in order to create blight so you can go ahead and then buy it off cheap and build a larger building. So it is a giveaway to a set of look, there's nothing. As I've said many times, developers are going to do their thing because it's their self-interest. Okay,
of course, that's their job.
That's their job. Okay, they're not in the position to care about what's good or bad for the city of Coral Gables. They're worried about what's good or bad for their bottom line and their pocket, and that is the American way. That is, like the capitalistic way to look at it. If you're going to be a public official, though, and you're going to pretend at least to represent the interests of the community, you have to care about those things. Well, you have to be able to say no when those items go in front of the commission. And the very least, if you're constrained legally in some way from being able to say no, do whatever is required to make sure that the project is tailored in a way that is in the most beneficial to that's a public comeback, that public benefit. I mean, that's most beneficial to the public.
Yeah, I mean, it seems logical to me, the area that you mentioned, north of the mile, where there's mostly businesses in that area, would seem like the more practical area, maybe to have more density, higher buildings in that area. But the real estate's real expensive, so it becomes it's a balancing act.
It is a balancing act, because clearly, if you're going to buy an expensive piece of real estate, you want to maximize the value you can take out. Of
course,
but you can do it in a way that sort of destroys the neighborhood, because then the reason people come in, it goes away, and then you devalue the overall value of your property.
But the other side of it, Javier, is that, and I've been a big proponent of this, and even though I don't like what really that canyon effect we talked about in Coral Gables, those new buildings when you get past Grand Avenue along that corridor there, is that, I'm not crazy about, they were built right on the street, they're pretty high. But that's where people need to live in Miami-Dade County. They need to live near mass transit. They need to live near places where they don't have to drive a car all the time. We don't have we have a traffic problem in Miami-Dade County in general.
I agree with you. So a consistent, logical, unified urban planning thought process should be in place. And unfortunately, what we have is this developer wants this building here. Let's look at that. Okay?
Yeah.
Yes. But
there's no cohesive plan together. It says this is the area where we
theoretically we have one, okay, but no one is following it to the way which it makes sense, because, okay, fine, do they have the rights? Everything is done very ad hoc, and then you end up with a situation where you're not following the plan at all. Mm-hmm. And look, it's government work, right? If you get 20% accomplished of what you're trying to do, it's a good day.
It's a miracle.
So I'm not saying that there's a panacea for everything, that everything can be solved fairly easily, but at the very least, you should your guiding light should be, okay, what's in the best interest of the residents? What can I do to improve the quality of life of those who live in the city? And in a sense, what can I do that is in the best interest of my family, and a broader family as city residents and as a city as a whole? So that's what I'm trying to, what I'm trying to run. That's what I'm trying to accomplish. I'll be one vote out of 5 up there, but at least that's what you will have if I am lucky enough to be the commissioner.
And that's Javier Banos running for City Commission, Coral Gables Group 3 election happening April 13th.
Correct.
Tommy, I'm panicking over here. Usually we've got our shot of Cuban coffee going already.
Right now?
I hope Denise is not sick or anything today, but maybe we can get her in here for that, because I crave that Cuban coffee. I want to talk to you about the election itself. So
sure.
April 13th is the day of the election.
Correct.
You anticipate typically there's 9, 10, 11,000 people that vote in the city of Coral Gables
typically every election cycle we get an extra 1,000 voters, and I anticipate, because of the massive drive for absentee voting that happened in November, this would be a higher turnout election. So probably around 12 to 13, maybe 14,000 residents will be voting in this particular.
And there's 53,000 registered voters.
No, residents altogether. In the city of Coral Gables, I believe registered voters is in mid-20s.
Wow, so you have a high turnout.
So don't quote me on that. I have to ask my campaign manager.
Gotcha. No.
Every so often they throw them at me, and they vary from election to election. But certainly that's the anticipation. There'll be between 12 to 13,000 voters, maybe a little higher, that will come out to vote on election day, especially because this particular election will be a crowded election. You're going to have, I think by now I've counted maybe 10 to 12 candidates that are signed up to run in all 3 races combined.
Okay.
It will be probably the most expensive election ever. I mean, we always seem to be breaking records every election, right?
Well, you guys must get paid a huge salary for
no,
the job.
we don't. But that's not the point, right? The whole point is to provide. But especially in the mayoral race, you have two sitting commissioners who are running for the mayor's position, and that will be a very expensive race because we have polar interest trying to get their preferred candidate in.
So it's Lago and Keon, right?
Correct.
And their polar interest in terms of Lago's less. Is it all about development and all these elections?
It is not necessarily okay. It's a host of other issues that come into play. But I think every election we get one or two issues that really are the drivers of the debate. And I think this election cycle, once more, it will be traffic and it will be development and the quality and ultimately the quality of life of the residents. The last election cycle 2 years ago, it was about annexation, but they're all related issues, right? We're talking about the concerns of what happens in your basic neighborhood, how good or bad your government is, and what is the future. Okay. And that is the driving issue. That's a driving concern for most elections, but specifically here, and it affects us more than to the actual local residents more than anything else.
Do you think that here in South Miami they passed a referendum, put it on the ballot, and it passed to move their election from February to the general election date in November?
Yes,
and they, the numbers that I saw said that basically the turnout would be double to triple the amount that they get in a February election. Do you think that's something you should do in Coral Gables?
It's funny that you bring that up. I sat here in the city of South Miami in a revision of the charter 10 years ago. And one of the things that I proposed and one of the things that ultimately did not pass back then was to move the election over to November. And I was part of the folks that voted to get that to happen. So if I have the opportunity to do it again, it will be something that I would definitely will promote. I think, although weather-wise, I can tell you from experience, I would not cherish having to run in the middle of summer, essentially late summer, to the beginning of the winter. So because it's very hot, it's exhausting. It has been a challenge with a mask going around.
It's more costly to run
but that is a selfish situation for the commissioners or the public officials who come into place. You're going to get a higher turnout, higher degree of involvement of the residents, more buy-in from the folks that actually are important to come into place, and it becomes cheaper because this election I think is going to cost something around $35,000 to $50,000. I think it was approved yesterday as to how much they're going to spend and all these things, and it is a significant expense to the city that doesn't necessarily have to be there.
Agreed.
The only concern that you have when you have a November election is that you tend to be drowned out. Okay, so that's the other aspect of things.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, when you're running for a local office in Coral Gables or South Miami or anywhere,
right,
it's really about knocking on doors and meeting people face to face.
It absolutely is. But think about it this way. If I'm trying to get your attention to think about local issues, development or whatever it is, and all your attention is about what the president tweeted yesterday, okay?
Right.
It makes it more challenging, okay? It makes it more difficult to get your message because campaigns are marketing campaigns, okay? You're trying to get the ideas and the information of a candidate, as I am trying to do today, out to the public for them to be understood, to be heard. So there's even though I will be a proponent just from a financial standpoint to move the election to November, there's a debate to be had
for sure
as to whether or not that is in the best interest of the residents.
For sure. So well, we're coming to a close here.
Thank you,
Javier. I want to thank you for coming on this morning and joining me here at Miami Community News. I think it's important for everybody that's watching this show or people that are out there in their community to get involved in the local elections. I mean, that's really the elections, and those are really the people that make the most difference in our lives, our daily lives, about the city services that we get, whether you live in Coral Gables or Miami Gardens or wherever it is you live in Miami-Dade County. It's those local officials that affect your day-to-day life. So remember, election, if you live in Coral Gables, election's happening April 13th. Get to know the candidates and pick the right one for that position, whether it's the mayor or the 2 commission seats up for election. I know here's one guy to my left that seems like a damn good candidate to me, and someone that should probably get your consideration in Group 3. But thank you so much for joining us today here on the Andy Cord Show at Miami Community News, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a safe and blessed day.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.